We are so honored to have her with us, and that's Dr. Sylvia Earle. She is really the grandmother of ocean conservation. And so it's been a stepchild in many ways of the environmental movement until recently. And she's one of the people that has changed that. She's also the resident explorer of National Geographic. Don't you wish you had that title? I love that title. She's been working on a film called Mission Blue. And Mission Blue it's about her life and her perspective, but it really is about the resource and the beauty of the oceans and what the status of the oceans is now. And there's a companion book called Blue Hope, which is just coming out. Are these for sale out? No, they're not for sale here, but obviously you could get them through National Geographic. And her film, this Mission Blue, is going to be premiered in New York on the 15th of this month, and it's also going to be on Netflix. So you'll be able to purchase that. Okay, I would like you all to give this phenomenal woman a round of applause, please, and welcome her, Dr. Sylvia Earle.
I'm just going to basically dive right in. We could start the video if we could, please. It's just a little glimpse of something that I could not see when I was a kid because we didn't have the capacity to be up in the sky. Google certainly did not exist. Astronauts didn't exist. Only dreams of being able to go high in the sky to the moon, Mars, and so on. But now these things are within our reach. I mean, 12 people have left footprints on the moon. Now we've got 7 billion people leaving footprints on Earth. There were only about 2 billion when I arrived in the 1930s. So I think of it in a positive way. There are now 7 billion minds out there available to try to solve the issues that we now face. As never before, we know what we couldn't know when I was a kid. 2 years ago, I had a chance to go speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos in the mountains of Switzerland. Taking a little dive into the mountains here, courtesy of Google Earth, to look over the shoulders of those characters who meet every year to talk and deliberate about mostly the economy. But what's amazing is that now the connection between environment and the economy, the environment and health, the environment and security, the environment and our very existence is finally becoming clear. What inspired me first to go jump in the ocean was the ocean itself, but also reading about the adventures of characters such as William Beebe, who wrote about diving with his engineer buddy, Otis Barton, in a submersible that they designed. Actually, the engineer Otis Barton designed it. And they crawled into it back in the 1930s, before I was born. But William Beebe wrote about it so compellingly that I was entranced as a kid. I wanted to go see what Beebe and Barton saw, as much as half a mile down in the ocean, where it's dark all of the time. It's something that, most people don't realize that most of life on Earth lives in the dark all of the time, because at 1,000 meters, about half a mile, that's just the skin of the ocean. The average depth is 2.5 miles. The maximum, 7 miles, 11 kilometers. Only twice in history has any human been to the deepest part of the ocean and come back. One-way trips, really easy. But round trips, not so much. Getting even to 1,000 meters is still a tricky business. So pleased that this country's ace #1 champion submersible, the Alvin, is now spiffed up, ready to dive back into the ocean with new capabilities that transcend by a lot its original design back in 1964, soon able to go to 6,000 meters. Well, that's about half the ocean's depth. We're right on the edge of what could be the greatest era of exploration on Earth, in the ocean. And James Cameron's film that has just been launched, check it out. Go along with him to see the ocean from the inside out, down to the maximum depth that it's possible to go without a shovel. All right, so here's a glimpse of what kind of got me started. Let's go now to the other images, please. Just a reminder again of who we are and something about where have we come from, and most importantly, perhaps, where are we going? Maybe even more importantly, how are we going to get to that future place so that we humans can find an enduring place within the natural systems that keep us alive? I mean, I know it's a little hokey to show you this picture. Looks like a classroom picture, but I think we should start every morning with an image of Earth from space pasted on the mirror that we look at, just to remind us about where in the greater scheme of things we are, and how much of a miracle it is that we exist. There are a lot of unfriendly options, even within our own solar system. Trying to set up housekeeping on Mars is a pretty big deal. Going back, let's go forward. This little blue speck, the miracle of the ocean that makes everything else that we care about possible. It's where 97% of Earth's water is. If you think the ocean doesn't matter to you, I've had people say, if it dried up tomorrow, what difference would it make to me? Well, if you like to breathe, well, if you like to be alive, first of all, because life exists, because the ocean exists, because water is here, and not just rocks and water either. It's 4.5 billion years of fine-tuning, mostly since the arrival of life, especially since the arrival of photosynthesis, and then all the great, amazing parade of life that has happened over the hundreds of millions of years that have led finally to our existence. But it's only taking us a few decades, a few centuries at the most, to unravel some of the basic systems that we rely on to do important things like breathe, because most of the oxygen in the atmosphere actually is generated by those little photosynthetic organisms in the sea, as well as, of course, the photosynthetic organisms, trees, grass, moss, and all that on the land. But the ocean really is where the action truly is in terms of driving the way Earth functions. If you think, even if you haven't touched the ocean touches you with every drop of rain that falls, with every breath. We just need to remember that, and remember what President Obama said when he wasn't really thinking about this particular issue. He was thinking about guns and things when he said, our highest priority must be to keep the world safe for our children. Well, okay, highest priority, got to keep the world safe. Well, until about now, we haven't known that there could be a problem. Earth is too big to fail, right? Right? Well, 50 years ago, that was the thinking. You could put into the atmosphere whatever you want. You can put into the ocean things you don't want near where you are. But now we know these policies, these attitudes are coming back to haunt us. If only we could go back 50 years or 100 years or even 1,000 years armed with the knowledge that we have today. What might we do differently? How much respect would we have for the natural world that is the underpinning of everything we care about? We're learning slowly, but we have to catch up, amp up our protection for the systems that keep us alive. Monitor there, billion year of history of creatures that have developed our life support system that makes our lives possible. So, when I think about the dreams and schemes of terraforming Mars to make Mars more hospitable for humans. Not for 7 billion of us, but maybe for a few of us who could camp out on the red planet, looking back on the blue one, the safe haven in a universe that is not safe for human life. Think about how we are Marsiforming Earth at the same time that we dream of terraforming Mars. There's more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere today than when I was a kid. There's a lot of carbon dioxide on Mars. It's mostly CO2 in that atmosphere. Step out of your spacecraft and breathe, you would do it maybe once, and that would be it. So we need to take care of the water. Now that we know that it is not infinitely renewable, there is only so much water to go around. When you think about scientists at Woods Hole dreamed up this wonderful little image that takes all the water on the planet, the lakes, the rivers, the streams, the clouds, the ocean, all the water that's in all of us and other living things, and put it into one big blue ball. That's it. Of course, if you spread it out over the ocean, the average depth is 2.5 miles. 7 miles max. It looks like a lot until you really look at it with the eyes of those who've done the calculations to see, well, actually, that's all there is. That's what keeps us different from all other places that we know about in the universe. But not just the water. It's life in the sea that makes this beautiful blue planet possible. Now, there's a fair amount of ice, 3% or so of Earth's freshwater, 97% of Earth's freshwater, the 3% overall, is in polar ice. And all of this that we now understand. 2 years ago, I had a chance to meet this bird. It's an albatross. A girl, actually a grandmother. She was learning to fly about the same time I was learning to dive in the 1950s. How do we know how old this albatross is? Because she had a band on her leg, placed there by bird banders back in the 50s, and it's been replaced a number of times, but albatrosses have a way of going thousands of miles in the course of a year in search of food to bring back to their chicks and also just to supply their own hunger. But they return every year to the same place. So this bird, named Wisdom by the bird watchers of Midway Island, where she lives sometimes when she has an egg to look after with her lifelong mate. Well, Dad is out getting food while she sits on the eggs. They trade off. And I just sat there and tried to imagine what she sees, what she has seen in her lifetime, what I've seen in mine, over oceans that now are crowded, clogged with plastic, where there's been a diminishing of the food that she needs, the squid, the small fish that once were really abundant, that have declined precipitously as the ocean's greatest predator, that would be us, have moved in from coastal areas into the high seas with high-tech methods that no natural predator can come close to equaling. We're using the weapons of war, basically sonars and new materials, ways of propelling ourselves to places that would be really difficult for coastal fishermen who are in the past relying on access to the sea to feed their communities, feed their families, but now, armed with new technologies, we're taking wildlife out of the sea in industrial scale quantities, not to feed communities and families, but to feed this luxury taste for wildlife from the sea and commodities such as fish oil and food for cows and chickens and pigs. I mean, if I were a cow, I'd object. I don't want to eat squid, but here it is. I have no choices. It's ground up and fed to me. And so what else can a cow do, or a chicken, or a pig? that gets a lot of ocean wildlife on their menu unwittingly. So all this was going through my head in the little visit I had with Wisdom, thinking that she may be aware that the world has changed in her lifetime since she began to fly. And I'm certainly aware of changes since I began to dive. But I am aware of why the changes are taking place. And I have some insight into what we can do about it. All of us do. We're armed with a kind of knowledge that no bird, no elephant, no dolphin, no whale, no cat, dog, horse, no other creature on earth, as smart as they may be, do not have the capacity to reach back into their family history, the history of humankind, or even geologic history to get an idea of how the world works, where we fit in, and what's happening to the world. I mean, even if Wisdom could understand the cause and effect of why the world has changed since she was a chick, she wouldn't know what to do about it. It's really a kind of a wake-up call for me and maybe others. I mean, think of what our ancestors, our predecessors, what my parents, my grandparents, even what I knew as a kid, as compared to what the kids of today know. They carry in their pockets information. Imagine if Galileo had a cell phone, or could reach the Library of Congress with today's knowledge. Or even Einstein did not have a cell phone, could not access knowledge that kids can do today. That's why I'm hopeful. I mean, 1969, 40 plus years ago, to be able to go up in the sky and look back and gather information and insight and to report it widely. I mean, all 7 billion people are not connected, but a fairly large number of us are. That's really reason for hope. We have knowledge. It's the best hope. We've always been connected. We just have not always been aware of it. That now we know that the dusts of the Sahara Desert can fly across the Atlantic and reach the snows of Colorado and continue on across the Pacific, flying with the winds. Always, all of us have been connected to everywhere else on the planet. We're in all of this, are in this together. But this is the first time that we have evidence, knowledge, the facts and figures to back up what's happening, and also how fast the changes are taking place. The melting of polar ice. I mean, it should be something to rivet our attention. It is, for some of us, knowing, well, what's causing this? Planet has been warming for a long time. Ice ages come, ice ages go. There are cycles, and humans have an ancestry that goes back, it depends on how you count, 100,000 years, a few million years. Our distant relatives somehow survived. But our prosperity has been reliant on having a planet that is more or less stable within an envelope of conditions that are hospitable for us. We want to keep it that way if we can, or at least kind of hold the planet steady instead of watching through our own actions accelerate the processes that are not in our favor. It's not just about polar bears. It's in the end about us, about how we're influencing and disrupting climate, weather, about acidifying the ocean with excess carbon dioxide. Who could have imagined that humans would have such power? I didn't know that as a kid, and a lot of people still are staggered by the thought that puny human beings could alter the nature of nature. But it's happening. We have the evidence. We're not making this up. We have documentation, cause and effect relationships, parallel. You draw the lines, you see the acidification, you see the destruction of fish, you take away the lobsters and fish for coral reefs, you warm the planet, you warm the ocean to levels that are not favorable to corals, and they die. They go into a state of what is known as coral bleaching. Sometimes they recover, often they do not. The consequences, about half the coral reefs around the world are already gone. In some places, like the Caribbean, more than 80% since I was a kid. And a lot of people say, well, so what? I've never been to a coral reef. If they disappear like the ocean, why should I care? Well, it's up to you. It's up to all of us to try to draw those connections. So here you are, flying along on an aircraft. Well, call it a spacecraft. And you hear, you sense that the engine is sputtering. And you see little pieces of the engine flying off. Oh, there's a little piece of the wing. Oop, there's some bolts coming out of the things that hold the fuselage together. Should you be worried? You know, last Friday, I was here in Aspen, and I sat at the Aspen Institute and listened to Condoleezza Rice, Secretary Madeleine Albright, and former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, and they were talking about, of course, security issues and about Russia and about the terrible dilemmas we now face. It's like you're there on the aircraft and you see these guys in the back and they're fighting. And so should your priority be to kind of get those guys to sit down and be quiet, fasten their seatbelts, because, you know, the engine is failing? You know, I mean, we need to do it all, but our first priority has to be, you have to take care of the planet that keeps all of us alive. I mean, somehow that has to be numero uno. Got to keep the planet safe, not just for our kids, but for us. So we dump a lot of things in the ocean. We're clogging the ocean with our throwaways, just pouring things into the ocean, toxins that come back to us not so happily in the wildlife that we take from the sea. Delicious mercury in that tuna sandwich, or sushi. Oh, those fire retardants, they are really yum yum in that fish oil that you take. Or, you know, shrimp cocktail. Do you know the real cost of getting those little crustaceans to your plate? If you did, you might say, I think I'll give it a pass. Krill from Antarctica. This is not something that relates to coastal communities or livelihoods of people who, for generations, have been deriving their sustenance from the sea. It takes high-tech ships that have only been to Antarctica or to the high Arctic in very recent times, armed with navigation techniques, with new powers to not only capture, but to take to market wildlife from the sea, taking the underpinnings of the systems that keep our planet steady. When I was a kid, we used to be afraid of sharks because we thought that we might be on their menu. Trouble is, we never were. Much. A little bit, maybe. A few people get munched on once in a while, but think of the hundreds of millions of sharks that have been taken in recent decades for people to munch on them, mostly for a luxury taste of shark fin soup. Shark fins are attached to sharks. It's not just, you can't just go and buy a shark fin without killing sharks. Don't people realize that? And when you kill sharks or tunas or whatever it is that we take from the sea, we're taking a bite out of our life support system. We sort of got it with whales, but it took until 1986 before a moratorium on the commercial extraction of whales took place, and by then, boy, the future of most of the big whales was very much in doubt. It still is for some of the great whales. Others, through protection, are beginning to show turnaround. Well, that's great news. Even though some nations are still taking whales as commodities, the majority of people have begun to see other values. Maybe we can do that with tuna and squid and swordfish and shrimp and other wildlife in the sea, and understand that their greater value may be capturing carbon. They're all carbon-based units, like trees. They don't photosynthesize directly, but through the food chain, they gather carbon, and ultimately it goes into the ocean and stays there as part of that ocean system. They also transport nutrients around in the ocean. We live in such a wonderful time of knowing, having access to so much information, that we can look and say, thank you, fossil fuels, carbon, the burning of fossil fuels, the coal, oil, and gas that have given us this gift of knowledge. The most important gift, though, is not lights. It's not heat. It's not the many things that we think about that we need fossil fuels to drive our civilization. It's knowledge. Now we know we have to do something different, because continuing down the pathway of burning through those fuels that have taken hundreds of millions of years to gather is a pathway to disaster. We know it. Let's shift gears. That's what our day is all about. Let's find alternatives. Let's make a pathway towards security. Doesn't mean we have to turn out the lights. It just means we have to be smart about how we derive our energy, smarter than in the past. I mean, I guess I have one more graph to show you. This is just the projection, the extrapolation of where we are, where we're going to go, how we're going to power our civilization if we keep doing what we are doing. Still, big reliance on fossil fuels if we keep doing what we've been doing. In keeping with an expanding population that if we keep going where we're going, it's going to go right off the chart and beyond the point, perhaps, where this fragile blue speck in the universe can accommodate us. You know, scientists aren't the only ones to sit up and take notice. The economists at Davos, the economists associated with The Economist magazine, holding big conferences, first in Singapore, most recently in San Francisco, another one coming up in the coming year, to say, okay, humans are altering the nature of nature. How do we take ourselves forward? How do we feed people? It takes fossil fuels to make it possible on the scale that we have been doing so far. It takes heavy loads of fertilizer applied in certain places, sort of disrupting and setting off kilter the distribution of phosphorus and nitrogen and other minerals and vital materials that are needed to keep the planet moving in a way favorable to us. You know, there is no waste in nature. The nitrates and the phosphates cycle around from the waste materials of every creature that's in the sea and on the land. And, you know, it's been that way until we came along, when we concentrate these materials in certain places, creating a new wave of dead zones. We need to look at nature and find out, well, what has worked in the past? How can we learn how to really harness the wisdom of the natural systems and make them work for us? Look at mangrove trees. They're capable of capturing like 50 times as much carbon as even the rainforest trees. And we've been just turning them into housing developments and turning them into parking lots, getting those pesky mangroves away from the coast so we can put a beach where the mangroves once were. Respecting seagrass meadows, restoring them now is a big deal. And respecting the green guys out there in the ocean, the prochlorococcus. If you haven't heard prochlorococcus, get it on your radar, put it on your t-shirt. This is the little creature that was discovered about the same year that we stopped commercially extracting whales. Penny Chisholm, a scientist from MIT with her colleagues, discovered, using a new technique, this amazing creature that is able to produce enormous amounts of oxygen, and take up enormous amounts of carbon dioxide. 20% of the oxygen in the atmosphere is generated by prochlorococcus. Learn how to spell it and respect these creatures. They drive the great food webs in the ocean. Little guys that can feed on these microscopic plants. And those go up into the bigger creatures that can't get to the microscopic plants. They have to go through several stages before even a whale shark, plankton feeders, but they feed on the zooplankton and sometimes small fish. The small fish are the ones that do much of the heavy lifting in terms of translating the sun's energy through tiny plants into something that the big guys can actually capture and turn into the fish and other creatures that we think of as ocean wildlife. Tuna, swordfish, and all the rest. We are blessed with the capacity to get up in the sky, down in the ocean, whether it's a space station in the sky, or I'm going tomorrow to be the space station underwater. It's the reason I can't be here with you for the rest of the week, to visit with this place where scientists actually stay underwater. And I have done this 10 times, most recently 2 years ago, to use the ocean as a laboratory. Why are all of you out there doing this? It's there to be done. If little kids can dream of being astronauts, why not dream of being creatures in the sea, to get to see fish swimming in something other than lemon slices and butter? I mean, we have a chance to see. People love to go watch birds. It's $1 billion+ industry. Why not? Let's go look at the fish. Let's go see the faces. I get a life list of 25,000 different kinds of fish. They're such cool animals. Why are we so slow to really warm up to fish and shrimp and octopuses and all those other creatures in the sea? I'm going to just speed through these last few images because my time is basically up and I want to get to this panel so we can dive into some of these issues. But again, the idea of being able to not only go aloft, we've invested in aviation and aerospace, and it's paying off handsomely. We've been ignoring the ocean, neglecting the ocean, and the technologies that it takes to get down to where the action is. And it's costing us dearly. We need to know what's down there. We need to address the issues that now we face as never before. The human pressures, of course, as we apply new demands to supply what it takes for 7 billion people. And there is always the black swan, unexpected. We don't know, so let's use the precautionary principle. Look at the Earth the way we never could look at the Earth before. We now have jurisdiction out 100, 200 miles. Every nation with a coastline does. And then there's the half of the world beyond national jurisdiction, the high seas, that some are now saying, why don't we just put that in the bank and keep it safe from large-scale commercial extraction of minerals, of wildlife? It's our life support system, after all. And meanwhile, within our coastal zones, let's have areas that are protected. Sanctuaries, reserves, I call them hope spots. 50 such areas were designated last year at a conference in Marseille. I mean, you can name the place. Actually, all of the ocean is one big blue hope spot, because there are things that we can do now that we never could imagine being able to do when I was a kid, or that we needed to do it. But now we know the world is in trouble, and therefore, so are we. But it is not without hope. This is the time as never before, and maybe as never again, to use the power that we have while we still have half the coral reefs and 10% of the sharks. There's still a few bluefin tuna swimming. There's still a few oysters in Chesapeake Bay. And there are kids coming along who don't know that it's not possible. I mean, there are kids wearing pro-chlorococcus t-shirts. Why not you? Kids who are going out and getting wet, responding to that great theme of education, no child left dry. Kids who are protecting sharks. And the grandmother bird who keeps having grandkids and new kids. This was taken earlier this year. They call the little bird, wisdom's latest chick, hope. And I think there's plenty of reason for hope. Thank you.